They looked at those 3,756 calls, and only 66 of those cases ended up on a police report, and none of them equaled a conviction. So there's a commonality here to these crimes. These are crimes we miss.
Welcome to Real Talk with Lisa Sonni, Relationships Uncensored. Now, this is an episode that they definitely don't want you listening to because we are talking about something kind of creepy. We are talking about something that happens way more often than it should, which is stalking. When your partner kind of turns to a predator, it might happen after the relationship is already over. I've also seen it happen while the relationship is still in progress. But joining me today is retired Detective Lieutenant Mark Wynn. So I will put it over to you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Lisa, for inviting me here to your podcast. My name's Mark Wynn. Like you said, I'm a retired Detective Lieutenant from the Nashville, Tennessee Metropolitan Police Department, and I worked in the field of interpersonal violence. My goodness, it's 47 years from my policing to now my consultancy with the U.S. State Department and the U.S. Department of Justice. And I train police worldwide on any issue that kind of moves in and out of interpersonal violence. And that's stalking, sex assault, child abuse, elder abuse, trafficking, and certainly domestic violence. So one of the things that I do often for the Justice Department is I look at the way police deal with these kinds of crimes and give them advice on how to improve their approach, their investigations, their response, and their prevention.
That is fabulous. I'm actually so happy that someone like this exists to be training law enforcement and kind of helping improve things. I know, we don't live in the same place. And I sadly, in conversations that I've had with you, I know that the experience of many victims of domestic violence and stalking and whatnot, they're just not, I know for me, I felt like it wasn't taken as seriously. It was always kind of downplayed. And sometimes I wonder, and I don't know what your take is on this, but is it just happening so often that we're becoming numb to it? Or like, why does it feel like some police officers just don't care or don't take it seriously? I know that's not true for all, but what do you think?
Well, let me give you a kind of a broad picture, and then we'll narrow it down to stalking. Years ago, we used to just say domestic violence, and it covered everything. But over the last several decades now, we realize that that was a mistake because all these interpersonal violence crimes are co-occurring and interconnected. In other words, if you've got stalking, you've probably got domestic violence. You got domestic violence, you're more likely to have sex assault or strangulation. So it's a broader field of crimes that aren't incidents. And this is the thing for policing worldwide. And I've trained very often in Canada and the UK and Australia. The Western policing model historically has been to teach police how to work an incident. Bill stole Joe's television from his house at 1 o'clock. We catch him, we charge him with burglary. That's an incidental crime. It's kind of transactional. You work the case, you catch the criminal. But with these cases, it's a course of conduct. So these are crimes that are ongoing. The very moment you get the call, that where you are in that ongoing crime depends on how good you are as an investigator. Because very often a victim with stalking, which is the next phase in a violent relationship, will delay the reporting for good reason. And then you have to figure out where you are to investigate and prevent, and then to give the victim safety plans for their survival, because it doesn't stop until something meaningful happens to the offender. And I've worked cases that have gone on for 20 years as an investigator. So my investigator's part of my bio is here in Nashville, we created the largest domestic violence investigative unit in U.S. history. Had almost 40 personnel working nothing but all these crimes, including stalking. 24,000 cases a year, domestic violence, and had subcategories of those cases like stalking. And when I left, I was a lieutenant. I had 20 detectives that worked for me, and we focused on not just reacting, but how to counter the stalker. So counter-stalking is a method that we recommend in policing because you don't want to wait until something happens like a physical attack. The online stalking is bad enough. It just scares people, and that's the intention of the offender. But modern policing requires you to be more proactive, and I'll get into the resources later on if you like.
Yes, we're definitely going to add that in because that's so important. I downplayed what was happening to me. And I think if you'd asked me even like 2 years ago, and this happened 5 or 6 years ago, was I stalked? Stalked. No, I was stalked. I absolutely was. And it's just, I don't know, sometimes it's the label, not wanting to make it, for me, not wanting to accept how bad it was. But I remember when I first maybe started to kind of realize this was dangerous was I got a text message from a neighbor across the street that said that she saw my ex-partner lurking, was her words, on the driveway at like 6:45 in the morning, pacing. And I was luckily not home, but I was actually only not home because I was afraid. So I went to go stay at a friend's house out of fear. But he was pacing, chain smoking cigarettes in the driveway, just looking really angry to the point where neighbors were like, what on earth? Because they knew that he'd moved out, because I was smart enough to tell people. I'd heard that you should tell people so that they could help you keep a lookout. And hey, that advice worked. So always great to listen to law enforcement and, victim protection people that work in the industry. It was a very good advice for me. But it was in that moment that I was like, did he ever go to sleep? Was he just, why was like 6:45 in the morning? That's creepy. And I was only just starting to realize what that meant. And I later realized that as I put the pieces together, he would stalk online. He stole my laptop, tracked my location, was always trying to know where I was accusing me of being places, would show up at my work, all these things, all post-separation. That is stalking. Am I right?
Yes, it is. And here in the we've been through a lot of trial and error around how to stop this. For years, we had no criminal codes to deal with it. So we charged people with threats and harassment and extortion. Finally, California broke the mold. They came up with the first real criminal. So every state's got their own different criminal codes, but they're all the same when it comes to stalking, following repeatedly, putting someone in fear, causing some emotional distress. So we're across the country, every state has a statute on this. But all the things you mentioned are elements of stalking. Challenge has been for law enforcement is you've got to as you build your case, you're actually drawing a contextual picture of the crime, which means all the incidents, all the impacts. In other words, if I were working your case as an officer, one of the first things I would ask you is, how do you feel about this? What's been the impact on you? And it would be afraid, and I changed my lifestyle. And part of the evidence I want to produce in court, because that's the intention of the stalker.
Right. Of course. It absolutely was. Even when I moved, because what I was hearing from law enforcement was that like he used to live there. So, if his name is on the mortgage, on the lease, so like that he's allowed to be there. But, again, paint the picture. Yeah, you're allowed to be there. Weird that you had already moved out and you were there. Weird that you were at my work. Weird that you stole my laptop. Weird isn't really the right word, of course. But to me, I was like, why are they not seeing the big picture? I definitely felt afraid. And when I moved, I did everything in my power to ensure that he didn't know where I lived. And I mean, I changed like bank statements, driver's license. I made everything unavailable to him. There was nothing he could have possibly known and yet knew where I lived. And to this day, I couldn't tell you how he knows, but I assume based on stalking. That's my thought. But I think a lot of people see this, at least the survivors that I speak to talk about, they downplay it, and it's a coincidence. And I'm sure that the perpetrators it's no big deal. And I have a right to, and hey, but you're my wife, or you've got my children, that sort of thing. They really downplay it. Like, what patterns do you most often see in how the perpetrators, defend this?
Well, and I've locked up a lot of these people over the years, and my detectives have too, who work for me. And you, as an investigator, you have to look at the behaviors of the offender and the impacts on the victim. This perception and reality of the victim. And when you start working these cases, interesting when you get down to the arrest phase, cart before the horse, but you get down to the arrest phase with these offenders, and you'll ask them, what are you trying to do here? What's your message to this person? And you'll hear, well, a torture relationship is better than none at all. They can't lose control of something they think they're entitled to. And especially true with interpersonal violence. Now, we've got different kinds of stalkers. They all do similar things. Like, I'll give you an example, somebody you just met, blind date, dating app. You sit down with them for a minute and you think, oh my God, no, this isn't for me. And then you politely walk away, and they're persistent after that. They start, threatening you. They start doing things online. We used to call that our narcissist stalker. They don't like to be turned down. You've got the obsessional, which is somebody who has got some psychotic issue going on. They have mental problems, obviously. They're obsessed with somebody they don't even know. That's celebrity stalker. We've had tons of those. In Nashville, where I live and where I worked as an officer, we had country music celebrities, and all of them have a stalk. And those people will let you know who they are. They're not hiding their identity. They have a mental, they are dangerous. The one that's most dangerous, though, is the one that's prior relationships. It's husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, dating relationships, where that period of stalking is sometimes shorter and span from some of these other stalking cases. They're the most dangerous. We looked at our murders here in Nashville back in the 90s and did an analysis on our domestic violence homicides and realized that almost 80% of our homicide victims in domestic violence were stalked before the murder. Now, our national crime victimization studies show in the U.S. about 82%. So there's some sign somewhere that this is going to happen in a lot of our homicides, and we're doing more risk assessment, lethality assessments to predict. I've got a stalking assessment I'll give you before we finish. So we know it's preventable. We know it's predictable. We know we have to be curious. You have to have a curiosity to do this work. You have to think out of the box because the offenders do. Nowadays, it's much easier because of the electronic devices that they can buy online and thing where you change your identity, your number, and your voice. It's easy to find people because we're all so interconnected on the internet, right? You can't hide your name's out there, your social security number out there, all that. So a couple of other reasons, by the way, why they stalk is the voyeur. The voyeur is somebody who's just getting sexual gratification by following someone, peeking in the window late at night. They may seem innocent, but that's someone who often turns into a serial rapist. Now, all these people, they do the same things, but for different motives. Political stalkers, we've had our share of those here as well. And those people sometimes are easier to catch. But you have to look at the intent. What's the intention of any act, any phone call, any letter, anything at all, any third-party incident, getting proxy stalking, where you get somebody else to do it for you, like a friend or relative. But we know this is the pathway to murder. Not mean to be melodramatic, but nope. You have to consider that. Now, not every person who does this is a killer, but you have to understand how dangerous these can be if they go unaccountable. So the last reason the offenders stalk is because they can. So when I go to a juvenile, I'll ask them, if I were a stalker, how safe would I feel to do what I do in your jurisdiction? They often look at me like, what are you talking about? I said, well, tell me about your successes in your prosecution investigation. I'll give you an example. And stop me if I go on too long here. No. Harris County, Houston, is the 4th largest city in the country. They did a study, to their credit, they did a study on stalking in the city of Houston, and they found 3,756 calls to police, 911, or in your case, I think it's 911, isn't it? Yeah.
Nope, 911 too.
911, okay, it's okay. So they looked at those 3,756 calls, and only 66 of those cases ended up on a police report, and none of them equaled a conviction. So there's a commonality here to these crimes. These are crimes we miss. Training, policy, attitude, priority, all that is to stopping a stalker.
Being held accountable. You talked about the entitlement and consequences and whatnot. I once spoke with Chuck Derry, the founder of the Gender Violence Institute. Poor guy's trying to retire, but people keep asking him for interviews. But he highlighted to me, and he wrote an article on this a long time ago that just should always be really popular. But it was a list of benefits to being abusive that perpetrators of abuse directly said to him in his years of work doing his gender violence work. All of it was about control and entitlement. And he has sort of concluded after decades doing this that the only way to stop perpetrators of domestic violence is to hold them accountable. And that is in the criminal system and in the family court system and the civil court system. They have to be stopped because it's not really something that they have any desire to change. And so they want to avoid consequences like jail or having their kids taken away from them or something. So to me, I was like, so police need to do more, essentially. Which I know sounds so simple, right? The cops should just care. I know that there's a massive lack of training, but I'm so happy to hear that there are police out there that have some level of training and do take this really seriously, because I think these patterns that you're talking about are so key. You're so right about it being an incident, and then can we do something about this incident as opposed to, wait a second, this person's in danger. There's a pattern happening here. This is ongoing.
Right.
That's huge.
No, you have to break out of the old mold of Joe got robbed and I caught the robber. That's standard policing. You have to look at all the behaviors of the offender and again, what their motive might be. But we studied this too carefully, especially in murder. A friend of mine, David Adams in Boston, wrote a book a few years ago called Why Do They Kill? And most often when offenders, intimate partner violence offenders kill is when they've lost complete control. And that's control of your movement. So now the coercive control begins to bring you back into the relationship. And that's when it's, labeled as stalking in most places. So you have to look at it that way. Like, and I tell cops all the time, the very moment you hear of any kind of harassment, you've got to evaluate for stalking. You've got to look at what's going on here. Is it innocent? They don't understand, they're misreading some relationship, or is there prior history there where the offender has used those tactics, coercion and threats and intimidation and isolation and sexual assault and physical assault and financial abuse. All those things equal up a clear picture of the profile of the offender. And if you don't see it, then you're asking for a homicide. I hate to say it that way, but it's reality. Because I've worked a lot of murders, just worked. And when we look back into a perspective, you see signals and signs were missed by somebody, which means it's not just a police response. You've got to have a community response. There's got to be the courts, the probation, the corporate executive who will support you in, making sure the security guard at the front door of the business knows who's stalking you, the school where you go to school, your family, the hospitals. There's got to be a set of tripwires throughout the community to let you know that this is happening. And then all those communities have to hold this up. You can't arrest yourself out of the problem. That's the start. But accountability comes from the entire community.
Yeah. And I think that's so important too. You said this to me actually, that one thing that you noticed, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that a lot of victims of abuse defend the perpetrator. And so even if he were caught in maybe if we're not even talking about stalking, but just in general, if they're caught, sometimes the victim is like, no, but this is what's really happening, and trying to defend. There's so much self-doubt. Like, am I imagining this? What if I'm overreacting? Is this not as bad as I think it is? Or maybe he'll just stop. I hear a lot of my clients will be like, I hope he gets bored. This isn't entertainment necessarily. I mean, I realize it might be a component, but control is actually at the center of this, and entitlement. So bored, mine didn't get bored, I can tell you.
There's a great book out there. I think it's a primer we all should read if you're working in this business, called Coercive Control by Evan Stark. Evan passed away back in last year in March. He's a friend of mine, but he worked at Rutgers University. And what Evan did, he was a sociologist. He actually went to the UK with his beliefs about coercive control and convinced the government to actually reshape their criminal charges, allowing police in the UK, now they're doing it in Ireland, to charge you with coercive control.
I didn't know he was behind that. I know of that law.
Yeah, and by the way, it's happening here in the U.S. The start of it is with civil law, where you can get a protective order on coercive control now in Vermont and New York and California, these other places. So we're starting to evolve to the point where eventually police will be able to charge you with coercive control. And the thing about coercive control, it talks about this, you're basically taking away someone's liberty. And I'm sure I can't go out like this, I can't do that, I can't socialize. My liberty has now been limited by fear of what I don't know is going to happen to me next. So that's another part, by way of the evidence you would use to prove emotional distress of the stalking. Now, the reluctance to cooperate. This is common in interpersonal violence cases because most likely you've been in a prior relationship, which means you love someone. And people get upset about this all the time when you talk to them about it. They made their bed, may let them sleep in it. You go, wait a minute. If it were against the law to pick the wrong person as a mate, a lot of us would be in jail. So it happens when all of a sudden you're confronted with the consequences of a criminal investigation, and you'll hear some victim say, first, I love him, I don't want that to happen, I just want him to stop. Or, I'm not stopping, I want it to happen, but what are the consequences for me? Because very often after an arrest, that's when the witness intimidation starts. That's when the victim is at higher risk. Our numbers are clear about this. 3/4 of the victims are killed, and you kill after they've gotten out. So you can see, if I'm trying to convince somebody to leave the relationship, they're thinking, wait a minute, can I afford criminal justice to them? Or do I trust the police to help me? And if I don't trust the police, it's more dangerous to report. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to people, but that's what's going on in the survival, strategies for victims. Matter of fact, it's not a deterrent for us anymore. If I've got a victim who is minimizing, that's evidence. If I've got a victim who can't remember, that's evidence of trauma. I mean, we're looking at the state of mind of the victim more and more now than ever before. And that's made a big difference in our stalking cases and our interpersonal violence cases as well.
I am like overjoyed to hear you say that. And honestly, I'm 100% confident that my audience would feel exactly the same way. Because it does, not to defend as we're talking about law enforcement, but I also know that police are upholding the law. So we need to vote. We need to, do what we can do to make the laws better so that police have more power. But also the training that you're talking about, coercive control, having experienced it myself, right? And I didn't know when I was in it. I never even heard of coercive control. And I didn't think it was abuse. Not at any point. Not even after physical violence did I think it was abuse. It wasn't until I was already out that it all started to piece together. But having experienced so much of this myself, I can understand the denial that we're in. I can understand what it's like to have to pick up the phone and call the police. I remember like my hand, I was shaking. Like I need to report to domestic violence. Like I was so nervous because I thought like, what's going to happen? And oh my God, is he going to go to jail? And am I ruining his life? And obviously the first thing he said was, you ruined my life. And of course was not his choices to do the acts that were illegal. But it was even the denial of it, like the entitlement to behave that way, to stalk, to cause harm, all of it, like none of it mattered. And I think the police did like an okay job, I have to say. I don't feel like I was totally badly treated, but I also have a lot of clients who were and cops that are like, I don't know, there's nothing I can do. He has to do something. I understand he's lurking in your driveway every day, ma'am, but he hasn't done anything.
But that is something, and that's the thing. Like I said, you have to draw a concealed picture of the crime. All that behavior has meaning to it, because if I'm looking at context, any individual act has meaning to him. What does it mean for him to sit outside your house? What does it mean to him to do calls and hang up the phone? What does it mean to him to slander you on social media? There's meaning to each one of those. So one of the tactics as an investigator that you tell your victim, every time something happens, every time, I don't care how often, call us for a separate police report, because when I build my case, I'll be able to show the pattern of the course of conduct when I take it to court. So a lot of people say, well, if there's some things aren't criminal in stalking, and that may be true, just driving down the road is not criminal, but if I look closer and find out he's got no reason to be in your neighborhood, that changes your everyday transportation, where you have a right to move about wherever you want to go. But when that moving up puts you at fear, then that changes the game. The other thing about not reporting, I have to tell you, here in my jurisdiction in Tennessee, we talked to the crisis line, the domestic violence crisis line, years ago, and I asked them, give me your demographics, time of day, who calls, and all that. Not the names, but they told us that the average domestic violence victims call the crisis line for the first time on average after the 5th assault. So that means there are a lot of victims haven't called yet, and there's 15 or 20 or 30 now. Several years ago, I was in Ontario doing a training, and the OPP asked them about that, and they'd done some studies, and they came up with 20 events before a victim in Ontario would call the police on average. So by the time the police get it, it's the police officer's job now to look at all those prior incidents, to build that into their present case of stalking. And if you don't, then it looks like an incident, and it looks like, it's just your flowers on your doorstep. It's a card in the mail. And all of that is part of the process to make you afraid. That's what the intent is.
Yeah. And so it's interesting because flowers on your doorstep. It's just flowers. It's flowers. What, I can't do something nice for you? Oh, now doing something nice for you is abuse. It's a problem. I'm stalking you. I can hear the sarcasm. Maybe that's just but I hear that so often, is the way that the abusers sort of reframe stalking as love or devotion. And in fact, I have a client whose separated husband tracks her whereabouts at all times, and their daughters. They have watches, but including the mother, and they are separated, living in 2 separate places. And it's framed as to keep you safe, to protect you. It's because I love you. And she recalls how much that felt normal when they were together, that it was so normal to have location. And if she leaves the house, he's like, where are you going? It seems normal. And I know that it isn't. But do you see that? How abusers can kind of frame it? Even when they're caught, do they frame it that way to you?
Well, let me just tell you, this criminal personality is the most sophisticated criminal personality we have ever dealt with, because they know how to deal with criminal justice. They manipulate from the very moment they're exposed. Anybody else who's responsible. If I were a cop and I went to somebody and I said, look, Lisa's upset about this. What is your relationship first? And by the way, your behavior's scaring her. Most people would say, oh my God, I never intended to do that. I'll apologize. Please tell her I'm sorry. I'll never contact her again. That's what normal people would do. But the offender is projecting or making some blame like, well, this caused by a liver and I worry about her. You think, wait a minute, you're not listening to me. You're putting her in fear. And they don't hear that. They see it as love, and that's not love. But this, you could track this back, obviously, to very often childhood trauma. You don't wake up one morning and all of a sudden you want to be abusive. This is something you've been exposed to, and it's learned behavior for the most part. Now, when you get into stalking, again, it's you think it's over when you leave, but it actually gets worse. And now they're using all the tactics, and they're hoping and praying that they can either manipulate the police or the police aren't sophisticated enough to catch them. So we have to work on that part of it. But, it's like I said earlier, it's my question to you. The very first question is, tell me how it's been for you. I want to know how you reacted to it. Now, some people can ignore it. And when you say denial, that can happen. But people sometimes do countermeasures, before they call the police. Countermeasures: get a new telephone, get a gun, get a C system. And those methods don't work. And then they find themselves thinking, I've now got to go to the police. So delayed reporting is a characteristic of the behavior of the stalking victim. That's part of your evidence. And by the way, same with rape. The reporting rape in the U.S. is still about 20-25%, maybe a little lower in some places. And now we know why victims don't report rape, right? They don't think anybody's going to believe them. That's a fear too for stalking victims. With the policemen to figure out. And believe me when I say he's going to kill me, or here's what he's done. He sent me a message or an emoji and a text. If you're not tuned in to the motive here, you look at it as a cop and go, come on. Change your phone number.
It's
like,
just
well, wait a minute. Don't do that to me. And we did that for years. And now we're training police to be hypersensitive because we know if you there's no margin for error here. Plus, and look at what that does to you. It takes away your life. Your life changes. Who wants that? I mean, you want somebody following you all the time and scaring you? And by the way, we've seen this with national victimization studies done by the Justice Department. We've asked victims, what are they afraid of? They're laying in wait. They're coming to my workplace. They're coming to my school. They're interrupting. They're interfering. They're isolating. They're intimidating. That's the method. Hoping you'll come back, or I'm going to show you what it's like if you don't come back to me. So they're using fear and violence to bring you back in a relationship, which is misguided.
Like,
and you
all you have to do is
once.
talk to me. I wouldn't have to stalk you if you would just answer the phone, if you would just respond to my messages.
I've interrogated suspects. Lisa, I'll tell you, if the interrogation of these people is different than most criminals. You're not colluding, but in my mind, you have to say, okay, I understand you love her. And is that what you want? Is that what you're trying to get across? And sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, I do. I love her so much. It's okay, good. So now you love her so much that you've been calling her for weeks. Is that it? So you get them to actually confess to the behavior in the criminal code. And as you work in these cases, you go, it can't be this easy. But when you talk to men, and some women do this, but it's mostly men, you hear the entitlement. And I know what entitlement is because I'm a man. I know what privilege is because I'm a man. And that's the juice. And you'll in domestic violence, you'll hear, if I can't have you, nobody else will. If I catch you with anybody else, I'll kill you and I'll kill them. Death before divorce. I've heard that 1,000 times.
Oh, yeah.
So there's
not going to let another man around my kids.
There you go. That's a big
I've heard
one.
it.
Now, your kids are involved in it, right? God bless them for this. They're worried all the time. And then child custody issues. It comes up all the time. They'll use the kids to spy on the other parent. Or they'll spousify, they call it. They're belittling the mom while they're at visitation. They come back and now there's a divide between the children and loyalties. It's sick, but it's what they do because it works.
I
didn't mean to ramble on. It's a rich topic.
Yeah. Oh my God. We could talk about this all day. You just reminded me of a time when he wasn't allowed to be with the children. And I went to pick up my son after school. And I was so focused on looking through the window, kindergarten, looking through the window, week 1 or 2 of school, and waiting for him to come out, that I didn't notice that he was standing right beside me and had brought a Happy Meal to give, and just walk away. All he wanted to do was give a Happy Meal and walk away, right? So what's the big deal? You're not supposed to be here. There is a literal active restraining order. And you're just like, but all I want, the entitlement is right there. It is so clear to me that, yeah, but I just wanted to, the law doesn't matter. And actually, that's where it gets, I think, even scarier. And truly, like, really, the use of the word narcissist feels very applicable here, because it's that, like, this doesn't apply to me. I am superior to a restraining order. I can do whatever I want because I feel entitled.
And what you hope for is that the courts understand the urgency dealing with a stalker. And very often, stalkers are first recognized at the beginning of violations of protective orders. That's when sometimes they show their face, because you don't have to have a criminal complaint to get a protective order anywhere in the country. So sometimes the victims will go to their advocate or a lawyer or the court to get a relief from protective order, but they're not on the radar screen for police yet. The violation then triggers the police response. Then they sometimes, if they're smart enough, they can see there's other criminal acts going on here, not just violating the order. They're actually stalking the victim. So there are a lot of victims who would never call the police. And I understand why you wouldn't. If you don't trust the police, it's not to call them. But the other part is scary, talking to the police. Wants to go to say, I'm a crime victim. Plus, your life is interrupted. And life's invasion is part of it, too. That's what they're banking. They're banking on you saying, I can't leave work. I can't tell my boss. So now your job's at risk if something happens to workplace. They know your security number. They know your bank account number. They know how to change the thermostat temperature in your house because of smart technology. They just wreak havoc, and you'll hear victims say it's crazy making. And it is.
Yeah. Yeah. It drives you absolutely crazy. I remember, like, you leave your house and you're checking both sides, looking in the back seat of my car. I suppose women could do that any old day, but like that, it became the norm. I had a go bag in my trunk ready to go at any point if I needed to flee. His mother once called me and said, he was just here. He's flipping out. I don't know. He's talking crazy. I don't think you should be at home. I think you need to leave. I think you need to go somewhere. I was completely shocked, but she made it sound like he was for me.
I'm glad she did that.
I was shocked.
Some parents won't do that. That's why you have, homicides, and the parents say, well, we didn't think you'd do that. Really?
Yeah, we didn't know he would do it. I find it interesting because ultimately it was me that didn't know how dangerous it was. And I'll tell you the moment that actually everything came to a head for me and I realized just how bad, just how dangerous. And it was a pivotal, life-saving moment for me, which was I booked a call with a person online who's a self-aware narcissist named Mental Healness, Lee Hammock. And I just wanted his perspective. I was still so freshly out. And he's from the South too, actually, not Tennessee, but he's like, girl, you fitting to meet Jesus if you keep going on like this. You realize this guy is going to effing kill you. You have to get out of this. You have got to. You are going to die. And I was like, what? It's like an abuser telling me that I'm going to die. And I absolutely, it gives me chills even thinking about it to this day. Scared me straight. And it was the last time that I really engaged in anything with my abuser. I was like, this is so serious. And I appreciate that, like, big talk from him. And I wish that, like, police officers could see that and almost help and see to sort of convince victims just how bad it is. Because police are the ones that sort of see it on a macro level and can really say, like, hey, do you know that this all means you're in danger, instead of we can't do anything about it?
Well, if you do it right as an investigator, you're not only trauma-informed at what trauma looks like, you're victim-centered, which means you help the victim assess themselves and their risk. I'll give you a couple examples of it. Yardley Love, a student at the University of Virginia, was murdered, started the One Love Foundation. And One Love looked at these kinds of cases and assessing that you can download from Google Plus or iTunes that helps you assess your own risk, and stalking's part of that. Over in Pittsburgh, a company along with Pittsburgh Police, Bright Sky, and you can download it on your phone, and it does the same thing. You can it'll ask you questions about the behavior of the offender, and it'll give you an equation of the potential lethality. I like those app-based systems because this generation doesn't touch paper anymore, so more than likely they've got an app on their phone. So we're asking victims now. The other part of this is that training police how to do stuff. You're lucky you live in Ontario, because one of the things that they designed for police response in Ontario was the Ontario Domestic Abuse Risk Assessment. It's called ODERA. And it not only evaluates and scales the level of violence for an offender, your model, the Canadian model, predicts the next assault. I saw it being used in Ontario, and I couldn't believe it at first. And then I started asking questions, and it was designed specifically for determining whether someone's going to be attacked the next time, not murder. That's that's lethality, but just danger. So every officer in Maine by law has been trained on LODERA. We see it in Minnesota and Wisconsin or California. Now other states use lethality assessment out of Maryland called the LAP, the Lethality Assessment Program, and Dr. Campbell down at Johns Hopkins designed it based on indicators of homicide before the murder, and you can ask questions of the victim and then scale it high danger, low danger. When the victim, the offense high danger, then you hand that victim off to the next person, like advocacy and safety planning and protective orders. So now we're doing predictive policing around the country, and it's made a big difference. I did a training yesterday here in our state, showing the police different models they could use to predict future violence and prevent assault, stalking, and homicide, and sex assault. Yeah, that too. There's one other I'll mention to you. We've got a national stalking awareness organization. It's called SPARCS, SPARC. And SPARCS, a couple of years ago, worked with Dr. Logan, TK Logan, at the University of Kentucky. And Dr. Logan's a worldwide expert in stalking, and she actually designed an internet-based risk assessment that anybody can use that's called SHARP, H-A-R-P. I have to read it to you. It's Stalking and Harassment Assessment and Risk Profile. And what SHARP is it was designed for advocates, where you sit down with an advocate and you answer certain questions, 48 basic questions, and the system will give you a profile of the stalker. It'll give you a report out, sort of a narrative PDF form you can take to the police, and it'll give you a recommended safety plan for this particular kind of stalker. And you can find it at the SPARCS website, SPARC website, and it's called SHARP, S-H-A-R. That's the assessment. Now, advocates have been using it for several years now. Now police are using it. And I've used it on cases where people call me and say, can you do an evaluation? And it's pretty spot on. It's not AI, but it's pretty damn close to being AI. So anytime you have an advocate who's saying, I need to show you how much danger you're in, let's just sit down and go through the questions of the SHARP profile and see what you've got.
Yeah. That's so great that there's tools for that, because I know that, like, as we said, right, survivors are sort of like, how bad is this? We'll pull up that, and I'll link it in the show notes and everything so people can access it, because that sounds like a fantastic, necessary tool. That's great.
And I trained for the State Department, so I was in Bucharest in Romania in January, and they have a murder a day in Romania, a domestic murder a day, and they're looking for the best predictive model for domestic violence, stalking, and sex assault. And I gave them the Canadian version, which I like. I gave them the LAP version, and I gave them the SHARP version as well. The Moldovan police use one. The Brazilian police use one now. Singapore, Taiwan. The crime is the same in all. The behavior is the same. The impact's the same. The motive is the same. But a lot of countries don't have stalking laws yet. They're still working on it.
Yeah, which, we need to get that going, because it's far too prevalent for there to be any countries, quite frankly, that aren't taking it much more seriously.
Right.
Sounds like we're kind of moving in the right direction. Even if we say it's too slow, I'm always like, at least it's moving forward. I know that the attitudes are still very prevalent from these types of men, which takes me to this section of the podcast that I call Real Talk from the comment section. So I just want to read you a couple of comments from real life people who left this public comment and see what you think. See if you've heard this before, what your take is. Women call everything stalking now. All I did was sit in my car outside her place for a few nights after we broke up to see who was coming and going. If you're not cheating or lying, what are you so afraid of being seen doing? I wasn't even bothering her. I didn't knock or anything. I deserve to know the truth. That's not stalking. That's getting answers.
No, that's a confession to stalking. That's the easy one. If I were a criminal investigator and I heard that, I would say, okay, so now you're admitting that you're following her. So that's an admission. And this is minimizing by an offender is evidence as well. She bruises easily. I didn't hit her. She hit me first. We hear all this all the time in interpersonal violence. It's a tactic to keep you from thinking, well, it's an incident, not pattern. Now, there are situational violence cases that every police officer encounters, and that's bar fights, that's somebody arguing over a football game, but when you start adding it up and you look at the history, you see coercion and intimidation, all the other stuff goes with it. So part of the tactics of an offender is to minimize, to make it look like it's something it's not. And by the way, the victim will do that too, but the victim's doing it for different reasons. They're doing it because it's survival. Part of trauma response, for crime victims is not just fight or freeze, flight. It's negotiations and it's submittal. So there's more going on here. If I've been in a relationship a long time, the way I'll often deal with it is I'll appease the person, I'll negotiate for whatever they want to stop. So, and when you talk to offenders, none of that's present. Why would it be? Right? But you see the survival tactics, the trauma response, basically, from victims to survive. I mean, when you hear someone say, I go somewhere else, and you hear that where, well, in my mind, well, that's dissociation. People dissociate to cope because their body can't leave what's happening to them. But with trauma, you'll hear fragmented memory, you'll hear, physiological reactions, toxic immobility, collapsed immobility, all that stuff. And by the way, we know more about trauma today than ever before because of you in Canada. The Canadians were the ones that not pioneered, they just knew it and they told everybody else. When you see this behavior in a victim, that's trauma. So, and here's why this is so important. For years we've talked to victims about rape and they couldn't remember parts of the rape. And we'd automatically say you're lying. And it wasn't true. And so we're only now in a modern time holding offenders accountable for rape because trauma is part of the evidence now that we're examining. So it's certainly true with stalking cases too, because it's traumatic. If you're worried about walking out of your house every day or your kids sick, I mean, that's an incredible amount of trauma.
Yeah. You got somebody sitting out in their car for multiple nights,
right.
And willing to admit that on the internet too. I'm going to read you another comment.
Okay.
I almost want to laugh as I say it. All I did was put a tracker on her car and check her location because she lies constantly. I wasn't even trying to control her. I just needed peace of mind. If she wasn't sneaking around, she wouldn't care. Honestly, women only call it stalking when they get caught doing something shady. Another admission.
Okay. So here's the other thing. A lot of these people project on people things they're doing. And by the way, jealousy is a big part of lethality. One of the things that you ask a victim, if you're trying to evaluate how much danger they're in, is he jealous? Is he obsessive? Which means he'll check the mileage while you're in the relationship. You check the mileage on a car. He's checking your cell phone. I mean, all that is somebody who is controlling someone else. And you go back to coercion control, that's their playbook. If there's a remedy for them, get out of the relationship.
Absolutely. Run as fast as you can, as far as you can away from a relationship.
Right, the offender. I've asked offenders, if you're worried about this, why are you in the relationship? What are you getting out of this? Mm-hmm. And they say, well, I love her. Well, okay, you love her, but you think she's being unfaithful to you. It's not against the law to have an affair. But if you're living that way, why are you in it? I mean, it's so you get down to the core here, and they learned this, they know it because they probably saw it in their own family. Or they've been in another relationship. This is one of the things that's really interesting about these offenders. They don't usually have one victim. When you do volumes of cases, and we have here in our city, you see same offender, different victims. And you certainly see that with sex assault cases. Detroit, they had 14,000 untested rape kits, and there was all kind of reasons why which were all crazy. They finally tested them all, and they caught 800 serial rapists.
God.
800 who had raped women in 27 other states. So you see the behavior here. Let's find the next victim, next victim, next victim, next victim. It's so bad. We've got now in Tennessee, we're going to see how it works. We've got a domestic violence registry now, like a sex crimes registry. So if you're convicted of a domestic violence assault, you go into our registry where the public can see it because it's to protect the next victim down the road.
That is so important. Oh my God.
Yeah. We got their number. We know. See, this is the thing. We know who they are now. We know who they are. And by the way, there's a great book I read years ago from another friend who wrote about his own daughter's murder, George Lardner. It's called The Stalking of Kristen. She was killed in Boston by a stalker boyfriend. And George was a political writer for the Washington Post, Pulitzer Prize winner, and his daughter was in college in Boston. She murdered in a dating relationship. He had a long conversation with him after it happened. He said, "Mark, I'm not a crime reporter. I went to Boston to get my daughter's body. I started talking to people and found out what in hell's going on here in Boston." And this guy had been stalking her and other women all around the Boston area, but nobody was focused on it. And I give it to cops all the time. I say, you got to read this because it shows our shortcomings in criminal justice. If we fail, then the victim wins, and the offender wins.
Mm-hmm. Which is the absolute worst. Like, I'm going to go back to what Chuck Derry said. We've got to hold them accountable in the law, not just in like public shaming. It needs to be consequences. That's hugely important and just doesn't happen often enough.
There's an old saying down south that a thief won't steal a hot stove. And if you make that stove hot enough, they won't touch it. And the hot stove is consequences in court for doing these things, right? Going to jail for protective order, going on, supervised probation if you do things. I mean, hold them accountable, send them to batters intervention programs, which do work, so they'll hold themselves accountable. And that's the end of it. They've got to look at themselves in the mirror and say, it wasn't Lisa's fault. It was my fault. I was doing it. I put her in fear. But the very minute you put someone in fear, that changes everything. It's not unusual. When you talk to criminal investigators, we're all pretty like-minded about what's consensual to you and me. So is my behavior, is that all consensual? If fear's in the room with you and I, then consent's not there.
I love that expression. I totally agree with that. Fear is one of the reasons that people stay, and I know from the outside, it's like, if you were so afraid, why didn't you leave? No, I stayed because I was so afraid. Given what you just shared as well about when you leave, it's the most dangerous time. It baffles me how that might be, in my opinion, the most prevalent, well-known stat for DV. Whatever people think about it, what we know for sure is that it gets worse after you leave, and it is the most dangerous time. And yet people are like, I don't understand why you don't just risk your life and leave. And you might have small children
Some people do. Some people, they want the first moment of violence are gone, right? We don't hear from them. They move on, but the ones who do stay are very often the ones who are kind-hearted, forgiving. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm looking for. Somebody who will let me get away with what I'm doing and let me make excuses for what I'm doing. So anytime a victim, if you're a parent, a friend, a relative, whatever, employer, when you got someone who you care about who's a victim, you got to be patient and think of it this way, that leaving is not just an event. It's a process. What does that process look like? The process should be filled with patient, kind people. Say, let's get you through the next obstacle until we can get you out of the relationship. But just to tell somebody, I think you're in danger, you should leave, what they're thinking, damn, why not think of that? It never occurred to me.
Yeah, I get real sarcastic, actually. I'm like, oh my God, leave. Oh, I never thought of that. I'm so glad you said that. I had no idea. But it is, this is probably a whole different episode, but like, you try to leave and they block the door. They take all the money out of your bank account. They threaten to take the children. Like, just leave is just truly one of the dumbest things that people can say. I understand encouraging to leave and understanding it's a process, but like, how can I help you take the steps? But just leave, just block him, just call the police, as if any of these individual solutions are really that helpful. You have to put a lot into play. Like, I've left. I know how hard it is, and many women have had it even worse, but
and by the way,
the
victim's behavior becomes part of your casework. Now, if I'm a detective, I'm going to ask her, did you leave before? Oh, yeah, 3 times. Got it. What have you done when he's confronted you? Well, I appeased him. I called his parents. That didn't work. I got angry. I shouted. I slapped him. So you see these things, and then it could be, because it has happened, I killed him. In all over the United States, there's women in prison for killing an abuser, and they shouldn't be there because the criminal justice system in those cases didn't examine the context to make it understandable that no wonder she killed him because of what he did. And you don't have to hit somebody every day to control them. You just do it a couple of times and you're reminded of what happened the last time and you've got them under your thumb. And that's the nature of oppression, and as in taking away your liberty. And if I'm not going to leave a mark on you. We know that with child abusers and elder abusers. All I got to do is just to remind you what our potential is. I'll take my gun clean in the middle of the night, or I'll kill myself if you leave me. Right? And
I got a client whose husband shoots squirrels if she doesn't comply, because it upsets her so much, because you're just killing a defenseless animal. But like, that's the crazy that is, and the way that they use that. But cleaning your gun is a really interesting one, especially as
symbolic.
Yeah, it's very symbolic. And that's the part that people don't get. Like, what? Mm-hmm. I'm just cleaning my gun. That's not what you're doing, actually. We all know. But it's that unspoken, you need to use logic and you need to be trauma informed to see this. So again, I'm so happy that you're doing trainings and that you are sharing this information with law enforcement and just the general public, because this is all information that like we all need to have.
Well, last May, we released a policy at the Sparks, which is a nonprofit funded by the Justice Department. We worked for a couple of years and built a model police response policy to stalking. And it's about a 30-page policy, and we've been giving it to police because you've got to have It's a very complex crime to investigate from the moment you get dispatched, the time the officer responds, the time the detective gets it, the time the prevention methods are in place, the prosecution strategy. So we put this in a standalone police protocol, and we're sharing all over the place. So I'll send you a copy of it later, and you can share it if you want to with all your viewers, so you can see what we consider should be a national standard for police response across the country. And it's certainly true for Canada. You know, the Canadian police, there's not a dime bit of difference in the Canadian policing and American policing, other than, in my opinion, the Canadians get more training than Americans. In the places in Saskatchewan and Alberta and Ontario and other places where I've trained in Canada, I think the police are much more receptive to change, thinking outside the box than we are. We're certain here in the United States, as you are witnessing now. So I think you've got a leg up, and for a lot of reasons.
Well, that's good to know. I hope my Canadian audience is like in any way helped by that.
Let me just say here, as an American and a real admirer of Canada, I am so very sorry that we got nuts running our government who are attacking our best friend on the planet.
Right. Bully. I know, like an older brother we don't want. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for being here today and talking about this. I really appreciate your time and all of your expertise.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate it. Call me anytime and be safe.
Thank you.